Well, this is something else. Trump decided to do something that I need to show you. But first, it's important that you have the context of how this interacts with what Piers Morgan told me yesterday. What do I mean? Well, we covered my appearance on Piers Morgan Uncensored. And Piers Morgan, as I have repeated many times, is sort of getting more and more just full MAGA. And so in that interest, he made this argument we hear a lot, which is that it's so ridiculous that anyone would point to Trump's fascistic tendencies. Now, his version of that argument is Hitler, you're calling him Hitler. My point is, no, sometimes we'll say, hey, that rhetoric was similar to what we see in Mein Kampf as an example of how it can be dangerous if it perfectly aligns like poisoning of the blood. Or, hey, that general of his said that he heard Trump say, I wish my generals were like Hitler, right? But we're not saying he is Hitler. That would be silly. But that's not the same thing as going, hey, he exhibits fascistic tendencies that point to this fascism ideology. He doesn't like that. But then Trump came along and did something that pretty brutal, given what Piers just argued to me. You made a fool out of the both of us, Piers. While you're watching this, please do click the subscribe button. Here's Piers.
Yeah, I went to the Madison Square Garden rally. Do you know how many protesters turned up when Hitler came to the middle of Manhattan, the great liberal democracy, in their iconic venue? 150 bothered to get off their lazy backsides from screaming Hitler and fascism for years to go and protest.
I was there too, Piers.
They couldn't be bothered because you know what? It's almost like they didn't believe what
at a Trump rally.
It's like they didn't believe what they were saying, right? Emma, you wanted to agree with me.
All right, so then it throws to Emma. But first, before getting to what I was saying, here's a little bit more when it came back to Piers as to what he said.
Of the problem, and in
actually,
in the history of fascism,
you had me for
corporations capitulating to fascists.
All right, you had me for some.
Is a big part of how fascists get to rise.
You had me for some of that, but once you start talking about his extremist language and stuff, you're missing the point. The reason he won so big is that most Americans don't think he does have extremist views. They think a lot of it is just common
maybe
sense.
You didn't tell them about it, Piers.
Luke?
That is a failure of the messaging of the Democratic Party.
Okay. So he's been saying this a lot. Every time I've been on, he's brought up, why do people say he's Hitler? That's not what we're saying. And if some random person is saying it, okay, they're wrong. But I'm the one who's making this argument. And just because you might see someone out there who says Trump is going to be exactly Hitler, doesn't mean you then get to look past, even while we disagree with that, the very real authoritarian expert identified signs of Trump's authoritarianism that he puts out in the open, as we're about to talk about. And I tried to clarify that. Again, just a little bit more of this, and then I'll show you what the latest news is.
Let me bring Luke in.
I feel like I've told you this, Piers. Deborah and I just recently had a conversation on my show. I definitely clarified this for her. No one, again, relevant, prominent Democrats in positions of power are saying Trump is Hitler. Stop with that. It's the whiniest thing. No one says that. If you think we shouldn't,
the Madison Square Garden thing was literally described as a neo-Nazi rally. A neo-Nazi rally.
When Trump's
it was full of Jewish people. There was a Holocaust survivor in the front row.
I haven't called it that. Can I please finish the dang point? The point that I don't really care about the Mika Joe thing is just, sort of cringe. But much more important is that we keep going around this merry-go-round. Oh, they called him Hitler, now this, now that. I'm sure some random people on the internet say that. But again, that's not the line from Biden and Harris. That's not the line from Trump's own former administration. So can you please...
They called him a fascist.
Biden and Harris don't say something Democrats aren't
so you think he is a fascist?
That's a horrible line to live by. Right. That's ridiculous.
All right, Luke, but Luke, to be clear, Luke, you think he is a fascist?
Of your behavior,
Luke,
Piers, on this
is he
show.
A fascist? Luke, is he a fascist?
Of course, he absolutely exhibits fascistic tendencies.
There we go.
So why did Joe Biden invite a fascist to the White House? Is he a fascist sympathizer?
Because, I wanted to mention that from Deborah's point. If you respect democracy first and foremost,
you let a
then the
fascist in the
democratic
room?
will of the people. the democratic will of the people is more important than what you feel about the ideology. And it's important to point out, we have to learn from history not to equate things, but to say, okay, what signs can we get from
so
past
a peaceful transfer of power to a man you believe is a fascist?
I'm curious what you would describe, you, Piers, what you would describe trying to illegally stay in power despite losing an election. What do you call that?
I thought it was completely outrageous what Trump tried to do.
Why are you obsessed with January 6th?
But I tell you, but Luke,
I explained that to you, Deborah. You know why.
Outrageous.
Hang on.
Because you wake up and think about it all day, every day. You guys are so obsessed.
Luke asked me a question. Let me answer. Here's what I think a fascist is. A fascist is
And then he goes on to say a fascist is really embodied by woke people. All right. And then I finally get to... So I also, if you're feeling like, gah, either Piers or someone else on the panel, Deborah, whose conversation with me is coming out soon on the channel, someone interrupts. It's crazy. It's okay. I take it as a compliment because I think that just proves he doesn't want my full point to get out, meaning it must be a strong one. Okay. But it is irritating. Here's the last bit. Once we went around, a whole thing happened. And then I finally got a chance to talk on a different subject, but I quickly wrapped up my point on the one before. So just quickly closing thought on the last thing. It's crazy that we do this. Like I said, merry-go-round, we go back and forth on the fashion stuff. We're just saying, I don't like that Trump posts on Truth Social a massive fraud this type of magnitude allows for termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even though it's found in the Constitution, saying that the Constitution should be terminated.
Can we move on to the other thing? Because you're getting a bit in the weeds.
Last thing, I don't like that he said the government should come down hard on MSNBC. Stuff like that, I go, that looks kind of fascist. And the fact that we point that out is not us calling him Hitler. But yes, I don't think on some of them they will be less controversial. Okay, and then I get on to the actual question that was asked there, but I was determined to get my point in. So, what's Piers' argument? Oh my gosh, it's so absurd. How dare you call Trump fascist when his own former general chief of staff called him that? What on earth has gotten into you that you would think that he has, and I know that term is really charged, so let's use a different one. Authoritarian. Also charged, but maybe we can deal with it a little bit better. Anti-democratic even. I'm sure Piers would also say he's not anti-democratic. Okay. And I already don't need any more evidence to that, given what I'll go through in a second. But first, Trump seemed to say, you know what, just because Piers made that argument, let me humiliate him and say the exact opposite of what he was arguing. And he posted on Truth Social, Republicans must kill this bill, in all caps. Very angry about it. Well, what's the bill? A free press protections bit of legislation that was bipartisan, but because of the Trump undertones, that this might be happening before the Trump administration to protect press from Trump, it's starting to lose support. And a press freedom advocate organization is begging Congress to pass it. So Trump's coming out boldly against this enhanced protections for the freedom of the press, as will be explained here.
The day after the presidential election, the nonprofit Committee to Protect Journalists issued a statement warning of a potentially hostile climate for press freedom under a second Trump term. It read in part, legal persecution, imprisonment, physical violence, and even killings have sadly become familiar threats for journalists across the world. They must not now also become commonplace in the United States, where threats of violence and online harassment have in recent years become routine. That's as advocates are urging Senate lawmakers to pass a bipartisan bill that would protect journalists from government spying and other interference. Jody Ginsburg is the CEO of the Committee to Protect Journalists and joins us now. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So your organization and others have raised concerns about what Trump's second term could mean for press freedoms. What are your specific worries, and what have you seen already that gives you pause?
I think we need to think about two things specifically about a new Trump administration. The first is around legal threats, and the second is around regulation. There are many others that we can talk about, but those are the ones I think we really need to be alive to in the second administration. Already in the days leading up to the election, Trump issued a host of legal threats against organizations like the New York Times, CBS and others.
And she goes through what I'm about to a little bit here, but stuff we've talked about a bunch. And if you go through this bill, it's not something we should be disagreeing with. But why? So why would Trump be he's actually not truth socialing as much as he was before, but one of his more limited truth social posts, he's saying, kill this bill. Why? And on the part of Piers Morgan, I feel like so often a lot of defenders of Trump end up being embarrassed by the actions of Trump, if they're capable of embarrassment, because they underestimate Trump in the worst of ways, right? They underestimate just how bad he can be. And so a moment after we discussed this on Piers Morgan Uncensored, Trump in all caps confirms, not to make it about me, other people make the same argument, but that I was correct on that. Because nothing is more anti-democratic, that's what we'll stay focused on, because some of these other words trigger people, than being against protecting freedom of the press as much as we can. And so then, if I was talking to Piers, or if someone else out there was thinking, I don't know if one post about maybe there's something in that bill that Trump misunderstood and he thinks it's not as good of a... Okay. Then what about Trump's Truth Social post saying the government should come down hard on MSNBC? The exact quote was, the government should come down hard on them. And he was just talking about MSNBC, which was the them that was being referred to, for coverage of him that he thinks is illegal because they're so negative. Is that? Oh no, he's just making a joke. What about him saying, as we've gone over all these clips before and the posts before, that the press are criminals, those who do negative coverage of him? What about him musing about, if bullets flew at me, given where the press are located at this rally, they would have to go through them first, which I don't mind, he says. All of those things are just meh. And then I referenced the termination of the Constitution post. And then he didn't answer my question. He said outrageous, but didn't explain how it doesn't confirm that Trump is anti-democratic. But what about engaging in illegal activities to prevent the peaceful transfer of power? Assembling fraudulent electors, trying to get even Republican officials to overturn their state elections illegally by changing the vote counts, I guess Trump wanted, and finding votes that don't exist. What about pressuring your vice president to accept fraudulent electors so that you can stay in office despite losing? What about telling lies so destructive that your followers, while you sit back and watch, violently try to block the certification of an election? Those things, Piers Morgan admits, are outrageous, but he defends Trump as, no, he's not fascistic or he's not anti-democratic. Still, which will cause him, whether he, and I'm using him as just a representation of a lot of people, which are people who like to act like, no, I'm the nonpartisan journalist, but who actually are clearly doing Trump's bidding. Time and time again, when you try to characterize Trump as someone that he's not, you will be humiliated. Because he is who we're telling you that he is. So you either have to, which this would be terrible, but start defending trying to overturn elections, saying the Constitution should be terminated, media outlets should be targeted, CBS should be taken off the air, ABC should be taken off the air, MSNBC should be taken off the air, all things he said. Or you can just not be so triggered when we point out that history has taught us that's not a good set of values for someone who's going to be president to have. Maybe you can just focus a little bit more on how triggered you are that Trump would say and do those things and make those threats such that freedom of the press organizations are sounding the alarms, than how triggered you are that people call Trump fascist for it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments.